Okay, hopefully I might start with, hi everyone. My name is David Lowe. I'm the unit coordinator and lecturer for this unit this semester. Hopefully everyone can hear me. This is always a little bit awkward running these sorts of classes in Zoom. It's nowhere near, I much prefer face-to-face because I much prefer having people in the room and being able to interact and talk to you and ask you questions, etc. But this is the way we have to work at the moment, unfortunately, and we'll do our best to make sure that it works as well as we possibly can. So welcome. Just very quickly, before I kick things off and whatever else, a number of you, or hopefully a lot of you, noticed that comment up in the top corner. I might just share the results of that, just so you can, people have been putting in comments. Let me just quickly end my screen sharing. Stop share. And then I will share my normal screen, and you should be able to see that. So let me just change it so that I can see the chat window. Can everyone see, can you see my screen with the words on it? Can someone say yes or no in the channel? Yep, thank you, great. That's one of the difficult bits about doing classes in Zoom. Particularly if there's just a few students, I can get you to turn your microphone and cameras on, but when there's 2 or 3 or 4 or 500 of you, that obviously doesn't work. And it always feels a little bit like I'm just talking into a void, so it's always kind of good to get feedback. That thing that's up on the screen at the moment shows you is a word cloud generated from the words that everyone was putting in, and it's really interesting, the elements that are in there. I guess it's not particularly surprising that programming and coding are fairly significant, but it's also really interesting some of the other words that are in there, particularly things that have appeared a lot: communication and cooperation and creativity, time management, teamwork skills. There's a whole lot of elements in there. I'll capture this offline and post it onto Canvas so that you can actually see the thing that you've all helped me generate. But it says a lot about the things that you think are important, and most of those things in there are elements that we're going to be talking about this semester. So I'm delighted to see kind of a whole lot of things appear that actually are important. There are other ones that I think you probably missed a little bit, but we'll get to them later in the or over the course of the semester. So let me go back to my slides. How do I stop sharing that? And I want to share my slides. Go back to this. Okay. So the very first thing I would like to do is an acknowledgement of country. For those of you who are in Australia, you probably understand what this is. Many of you, a large number of you, are studying this subject from overseas. And I don't know whether or not you've been, some of you may or may not have been to Australia, but one of the things that is increasingly important to us is an acknowledgement of the traditional owners of Australia, and it is customary to acknowledge that. There's actually 2 different versions of this. One is called a welcome to country, which is when there is a First Nations person, Indigenous person in Australia who is welcoming you to their country. Because I'm not First Nations, I can't welcome you to the Indigenous country, but I can acknowledge that. And so one of the things that we see as very important is that acknowledgement of country. So if you haven't seen a statement like this before, you'll probably come across it increasingly as you are involved in education programs in Australia. So a quick overview of what I'd like to do today. Normally there'll be a tutorial, and the tutorials are scheduled. Unfortunately, I would much prefer the tutorials to be scheduled after the lecture, but because of the way the timetabling has worked this year, the tutorials are actually just before the lecture, and that meant it didn't make sense to have a tutorial this week. So normally there would be a tutorial of an hour, and some of those are on Mondays, most of them are on Tuesdays. Then there is a lecture which goes for 2 hours, but I'll split it into two parts. The first half of most of the lectures will be a conversation or a presentation of a number of theory and concepts that we want to cover. So that'll be in the kind of first hour with a little break. Then the second half will be focused much more on what that theory means, how we use it, etc. And the important element of that is going to be that rather than me talking about the practice, as often as possible, we're going to get guest presenters in. So there's probably about a bit over half of the weeks where we'll get someone from industry or who has worked extensively in industry to come in and talk to you about the concepts that we've discussed that week, but from the perspective of someone actually working in the industry. There's a few times when we don't get someone from industry, and instead we'll use a case study where I'll walk through something that's happened in industry. So that second half of the lecture is going to be about what those concepts mean in practice. Today, because we don't have a tutorial, we've actually started a little bit earlier than usual, and I'm greatly relieved that it appears that most people have realised that. There's about 300 students enrolled in this unit, and I notice we've got 245 people online, so we've got about over 80% of the class have turned up. I suspect that a few of the ones who aren't here yet might have got the time wrong and will only turn up in an hour's time, and there might be a few people who can't get here, and so we'll look at it recorded. So today, because it's 3 hours instead of 2, I'm breaking it up into 3 parts. First part, I'd like to talk to you about the nature of the IT industry, what this subject is really all about, and why the things that we want to talk about are going to be important. The second part, we have a colleague of mine from industry, Huda Chahab, who works for a large company called Atlassian, who's going to come and talk to you about what her life is like, what her professional life is like working in industry, to give you a sense of what that means. For some of you, that might be very familiar. For others, it may not. And then the third part, I want to do some of the admin things, talk a little bit about the assessment in the subject, some introductions, how the subject is kind of fits together. And then we'll drop into Gathertown, which I know some of you have seen. I'm not sure if everyone has, but I want to use that just to get us help start the process of forming team groups and tutorials and things like that. And I'll explain more about that later on this evening. So that's what we're going to do today. So the first part of that, I mentioned I was going to talk about the nature of IT industry. There's a quote that I've got on this slide that computer science is no more about computers than astronomy is about telescopes, by someone called Edgar Dijkstra, who's a very famous person in the computing science field. And I think that's a really important thing to remember, that a lot of the time, you noticed in that word cloud that you generated earlier, coding was right at the very center of that. And it's not surprising, but it is important to remember that coding, computers, they're a tool. And so when you talk about someone who's an astronomer, you don't say that they're a telescope scientist. And you don't think of them as being a telescope scientist. Telescopes are just a tool that they use to achieve what they're trying to do. And so software is a tool. And so computer science is really about how we use those tools and what we use them for. So a lot of this unit is about developing that understanding of not the tools themselves, but what we do with them, the role they play, the things that make it challenging. In the same way that astronomers don't spend much time really thinking about telescopes. They're keen to make sure they've got the right ones and have access to them. But their real focus is what they're using those telescopes for, and understanding the nature of the universe, being able to kind of look incredibly long distances and understand the universe through a telescope. And for us, the same thing should apply. We should be saying, how do we use information technology? How do we use computing as a tool. And if we're going to do that, we need to think about what it is that we're trying to achieve with it. So that kind of feeds into what this subject is about. Professional practice in IT, the title of the unit is Professional Practice in IT. So the sorts of things that we'll spend this semester talking about: issues facing IT professionals. What makes your jobs difficult? What are you trying to achieve? What's the nature of the computing industry? How does it work? How effective is it? The sorts of skills and knowledge that's important for you if you're going to work really well in this field. And that's why I asked that very first question: what skills do you think are important? We'll give you some, each week we'll give you something to read. We'll ask you to define topics. We'll build skills. We'll look at practical examples from guest presenters and case studies that try to tie all of this together. But ultimately it's about how do you function effectively as a professional in the computing industry. So a good place to start is, what is an IT career? What does it look like? And so one way of approaching that is to think about the words that describe professional IT careers. Normally, if this was a face-to-face class, I might say, oh, can you get out your phone or your laptop or your tablet and look at a job site, like the ones I've listed there are all Australian ones, but you can look at ones in other countries and look for jobs that are in this industry. And then look at the patterns of the type of skills that those roles are asking. So you might search, think, oh, I'm really interested in being a database management analyst. And so you type into a job search engine, specialist database, and it comes up with a bunch of roles. If you then look at those jobs, what skills do you think it should be that it will say you should have? And so normally I might get you to do this in the class. It's a little bit difficult, a lot difficult when you're all sitting at the end of an internet connection. So I won't get you to do it now. But try this after the class. At some point in the next few days, go and have a look at job sites and look for jobs that you think might be interesting to you, and then see what types of skills they're looking for. I did that. I typed in information technology, software programming, computing, extracted a very large number of jobs, and then threw them at a word cloud tool. And this is the thing that came up. It looks a little bit like the one you generated. So this is kind of a similar thing to the one that I showed at the beginning of today that you created for me, but generated out of skills that were being requested for by people who were posting job ads on various job sites. And you can see a lot of very similar things in there. The words are kind of interesting. There are occasionally, they refer to specific products or platforms. There's a reference to Salesforce that I can see. Sometimes there is references to broader domains, like I can see CRM, customer relationship management. There are a lot of things in there, more really generic things like experience and knowledge and technical and etc. But there's also a lot in there about broader capabilities, management, customers. Actually, one of the really interesting things is there's a strong focus in here on people, and this feeds into what we're going to be talking about next week. I can see clients and customer and team and business. I can see client again in somewhere else. One's client and one's clients. So you'll see that there's a lot in there about the context in which you're operating, the people that you work with, both in your own company as developers or analysts or whatever, and the customers or clients you're working with. It's interesting that one of the things that's really absent from that list is really, really technical terms. I can see the occasional ones, Java, I can see, but there's not a lot of that. Sometimes that's because that skill is almost assumed. Sometimes it's because there is a feeling that in the industry, probably quite rightly, that the technology is changing so rapidly that most companies are of the view that when they employ someone, the people they employ are going to have to learn new languages, new tools, and you should be able to. What they struggle with a little more and feel that you need to kind of bring in is the ability to learn, but also these broader skills. So that's kind of where we've got to. One of the really, I've kind of already mentioned a moment ago, that need to learn, and that's because one of the absolute characteristics in this area is just how rapidly things are changing. If I go back 20 years sounds like a long time, back to, there might be a few of you who weren't born in 2000, but most of you won't have been very old in 2000. I first, actually, just to give you a quick sidetrack, I wrote my first line of code in 1977. So my first job in the computing industry, or writing code for a company, was in 1984. And so from 2000 until now is kind of less than half a career. And so things will change. If you aren't able to learn and change and evolve, you'll stagnate very quickly. So if I look at careers changing, in 2000, if you go back and look at skills that were commonly being advertised, or roles that were commonly being advertised in 2000, there were lots of jobs for Flash developers. Flash is now phased out. Lots of jobs for Fortran programmers. There's still a few of those, but it's very legacy. SEO specialists, quality assurance managers, Windows XP admins, all of those are almost non-existent now, or they've evolved very significantly. If you go and look at job ads in 2021 for things that didn't exist in 2000, you see things like chief listening officer, millennial experts, people who understand their customers, millennial expert, people who understand Internet of Things, a whole bunch of languages and technologies that didn't exist 20 years ago. Cloud developers, the concept of the cloud didn't exist 20 years ago. User experience design, there's been this shift from a focus on user interfaces to the user experience. So I guess what I'm driving at is there is this sense that the technology is changing, and that is driving changes in the types of jobs and roles that are being sought. If I look at this, here's a kind of a similar one. That's interesting. When I present these slides in PowerPoint, those dates didn't come up. Because I'm presenting it through Zoom, they did, which means in the original version of this, in the version presented through PowerPoint, you would have had to guess the dates, and then I could have shown them, but they've all popped up already, so I can't get you to guess them. But that doesn't mean that it's still useful to kind of look at those sets of dates. It's remarkable, things that are now so common and so much part of our life, like how recently they were developed. Android phones only first appeared in 2008. 12 years ago, that's barely any time at all. The iPad, which has gone through, I don't know how many iterations, is just over 10 years old. Apple Pay, 5 or 6 years old. Even Facebook is only 16 or 17 years old. And so there's some interesting photos there that they're all of computers and computing labs and facilities at the University of Sydney. And so you can kind of see how things are, how rapidly it's changed. So the point of talking about that is to say that a critical element in this industry is that things change, and therefore you need to change with it. One of the kind of characteristics of change is just how hard it is to predict. Actually, there's some quotes that I want to put up, but before I do, here's another kind of example. 1996 to 2018, 22 years. You look at how mobile phones have changed in the space of 20 years. The concept of an app on a phone, I suspect some of you are listening to this lecture on Zoom on your phone rather than on a computer or a tablet or whatever. The concept of an app on a phone, is only a very recent thing. And you look at the technologies that are now necessary to make that work. So if I look at there's some interesting quotes. Again, these would have come up one at a time if I presented this in PowerPoint, but there's some really interesting things here. You look at that first one. The telephone has too many shortcomings to be seriously considered as a means of communication. The device is inherently of no value to us. That was a memo by Western Union, who basically managed the postal service in the US, saying, phones, telephones, who on earth thinks that that's going to be a useful device? It's just too limited, it's no value at all. And it, basically, how many people, it'd be interesting to know how many 300 or 260 people on this call have ever written and posted a letter. It's fundamentally changed things. And it's not only that old, and it's not only people who really should know better. Thomas Watson, who was the chairman of IBM in 1943, is quoted, famous quote, he says, "I think there is a world market for maybe 5 computers." The computer was just being developed at that point, or the electronic computer. And he said, yes, they're kind of valuable. You can do big number crunching, but there's not many problems that need that. So maybe worldwide we might need 5 computers to solve things that, are needed every so often. 6 years after that, Popular Mechanics, a major, one of the most famous and well-known science magazines, said computers in the future may only weigh 1.5 tons. We might be able to get them down to that sort of size. And yet now we have mobile, you can't see it there, there you go, mobile phones that, weigh grams. Ken Olsen, 1977, as recently as that. I said I wrote my first line of code in 1977, and there was someone saying at that time there is no reason why anyone would want a computer in their home. Well, what on earth could you do with a computer in your house? Bill Gates, famous, paid huge amounts of money out of computing. We will never make a 32-bit operating system. Saying that for Microsoft. It's amazing how wrong people can get. Bill Gates in 2004, 17 years ago, spam will be a thing of the past in 2 years' time. I don't know how much spam you get, but it frustrates me no end. Bill Gates, who, one of the most famous people in the computing industry, was saying, spam will be, won't have to worry about it in 2 years' time. Sir Alan Sugar, who was the founder of Amstrad, I suspect not many of you have heard of Amstrad. It was a very significant computing company involved in the early 2000s. Said that was just after the iPod came out. Said, by next Christmas, the iPod will be dead, finished, gone kaput. Not of interest. And the iPod stayed around, and Alan Sugar didn't. That's probably why you haven't heard of Amstrad. Point of all of that is it's really, really easy to get it wrong, and that's because you can guarantee that technology is going to evolve. It's much, much harder to know how it's going to evolve. So what I'd like you to do is, again, go to menti.com and put that code in. You'll probably have to wait till I start it. Sorry, I'm just starting the slides so you can start typing in things. Just switched my screen, and I would like everyone to now, good, I can see people typing in things. I want you to quickly, there's 200 now got 267 people online, so I should see at least 267 things pop up. Oh, good. I noticed someone posted it into the chat to make it easier to put up. So I've got 10 things have been put in there. I've got 260 of you. I should see 260, and I've seen 11. So I want to see lots of you putting in suggestions. I'll give you a moment, and then we'll see how this goes. Now they're starting to get lots of them appearing. 23, 24, 26, 29 answers, 31 answers. Oh, come on, you need to interact with me. You need to help me here to make this work as well as it possibly can. So I want all of you typing in things. I've only got 37, 38. I'll stop when I get to 100, so you have to help me at least get to 100. I've got to 50. 60. Come on. There's a lot of you who need to kind of be paying attention and put in helping me out. 70. We're almost there. Mobile AR glasses, space travel, teleportation. Oh, teleportation would be so good. Then we wouldn't have this problem with you having to be online. We could all just teleport into a room. 99. We need. Oh, there we go. 100. So I'll stop it there and share it. Can I close voting and exit. Okay. If I look at that list of things that came up, quantum was not, surprising was there. Self-driving cars, they're almost here. Well, they already are here, but it's not very common. And the question does say, will be common. Contactless Bitcoin payments. Was it Elon Musk who said that he's about to start accepting Bitcoin as payment for his cars? Computer glasses. I saw AR glasses there as well. And one of my research areas is in augmented reality, particularly applied to education. So I had a meeting with a project student of mine this afternoon, gave her an Oculus Rift that we're using, so you can use augmented reality so that students who are doing experiments on physical equipment can basically look at the equipment and it'll augment it with additional information. Imagine being able to look at a magnetics experiment as an electrical engineering student and see the magnetic field appear around the equipment, or being a civil engineer looking at a bridge and seeing the stress vectors appear in it. AR glasses at the moment are very big and clunky. Give it a 5 years' time, they'll be much lighter. 10 years' time, you might have them built into your glasses. 20 years' time, who knows, you might be able to just put a pair of contact lenses in that augment your vision. Other things on there, 6G. I think in 15 years we might be up to 10G. Holographic present brain-computer interfaces, someone said. I think that's a really interesting one. So there's a whole lot of interesting things here. And again, I'll put these answers up on Canvas so you can have a look at what other people suggested. Floppy disk. I think that's kind of going 15 years, more than 15 years backwards. But it's really interesting kind of looking at what sorts of things might be common. So one of the common characteristics is that we tend to overestimate short-term impacts. So people think things are going to change quickly, and a new technology appears and nothing really changes, and people sort of think, gee, it's not happening very fast. And that's because we often overestimate short-term impact, but we often almost always underestimate the mid to long-term impact. Things, when you look a bit further out, change more than we expect. On this slide, there's a bunch of links to websites that have some really interesting predictions. If you look at some of the things there, quantum computing, I noticed it appeared a little bit. People talk about brain-machine interfaces, but that kind of leads into a whole interesting area of neurohacking. If you don't know what that is, go and Google it. It's quite an interesting kind of concept. Nanotech, particularly in the medical space, sort of nanorobotics that you basically go swimming around your bloodstream, sort of fixing anything they find. Dark networks, that's kind of already there. A really interesting author who kind of talks about this way in which technology is evolving is Ray Kurzweil. So if you're looking for some interesting things to read, go and look for stuff that's been written by Ray Kurzweil. In particular, he talked about the concept of a singularity. Some people may know what that is. If you don't, essentially it's the concept that at some point, we're already developing AI, and it's getting smarter and smarter, machine learning. But at some point, the AI becomes as smart as we are, and because we can create AI, the AIs we create can create smarter AIs, and those AIs can create even smarter ones, and so you kind of get into this spiral where very quickly it can create something that is essentially infinitely intelligent, and that's kind of a reference to the singularity, and that's because each cycle in that loop creates something smarter and speeds up. It's fascinating looking at how technology will evolve. That's kind of not the focus of this unit, other than to sort of say we do need to understand where technology is heading if we're going to respond to it and take advantage of it. When we work in the industry, we need to work with it as it is now, but you need to have a sense of where it's going. Otherwise, you kind of aren't taking advantage of things. And that there's a project in a subject I'm going to talk about later that kind of references this concept, tells us a little bit about the major project you do in teams in this subject is about how technologies can be used to improve or change a company. I started off today by talking about that quote from Edgar Dijkstra that computer science is no more about computers than astronomy is about telescopes. And so if computer science isn't about computers, then what is it about? Essentially, it's about what the role of computing is in organisations. So I want to do one last Menti thing, one last interactive activity to try to keep you a little bit engaged, and that is to go to Menti, this time put in this code and put one word in that describes the role of ICT within a company. So an example might be support. The role of ICT within an organisation is to provide support to that company. So can you give me a single word? Let me just start. I need to bring that up. So I can see it. Actually, this time I'll stop sharing that screen and I'll share Menti so you can actually see what people are putting in. So one word that talks about the purpose of ICT within a company. The purpose of ICT in a company is to provide communication. That's appearing a lot. Communication within a company. You think ICT? Think about what's the purpose of ICT within a company like Airbnb or Uber or a bank. What's the purpose of computing technology within a bank? There's one key word that I haven't seen come up yet. Support, yeah, that's not the word, but that's good. Efficiency. There's two concepts that we'll talk about at different points that'll probably appear quite often in the subject, and that's effectiveness and efficiency. So I'm pleased to see efficiency come up. Convenience, yeah. I was trying to see, the screen keeps changing obviously, and so I'm trying to see whether or not the keyword that I was looking for is there. 76 people have responded, 79. Analytics, people, maintenance, technology, etc. Okay, I might stop there. So if I exit that and go back to my stop sharing that screen. Actually, I might leave it on my main screen, just switch to my slides. It's probably easier. If you think about the things that you can do with ICT, it can be used for administration. You get plenty of companies who use computing software tools to support invoicing or communication or emails, just the general background running of the company. Finance and accounting, you can do business planning, particularly financial elements, financial forecasting, auditing, market analysis, keeping track of records, messaging or communications, email and instant messages and things like that. A mobile phone is a form of, users computing technology, and it's obviously used for communications, but other things as well. You can use it for design, for simulation. Lots of companies use computing to support design aspects. All sorts of other things. You can use it to book a flight. So it's so deeply embedded in organizations and business, and now there's one kind of key word that didn't come out that kind of represents almost every single one of those, and that is value. In other words, the role of ICT is to add value to the company, to make it better in some way than it was previously. And so I want to come back to that term lots of times. So if I think about the business landscape, I was asking you what's the role of IT in companies, then a good place to start is to look at the business landscape, and it is changing. There are characteristics of business and organisations that are fundamental to what we do with technology. Globalisation. Computer technology gives us much broader reach. I can get online and buy something from Brazil that 10 years ago I wouldn't have had a hope of being able to get. And so companies have much broader reach. Deregulation. When I can go online and buy something from Brazil, what does that do to paying Australian tax on something that's been, that I'm getting mailed to me from there? What does it do in terms of competition? So the business landscape has evolved and will continue to evolve. Customers are changing. They're becoming more sophisticated and more demanding, and more compartmentalized in a way. In fact, I've got their markets. They're becoming more fragmented. You can do mass customization. So whereas previously you might have developed a product and then tried to sell it to everyone, increasingly you can do mass customization. You can say, well, we'll adapt that product individually for particular individuals. And the underlying technology that supports this, the power of the web, gives you a lot of that reach. So this sort of the landscape that we're operating in is evolving. One of the key things that you should be thinking about if you're going to work in this industry is how well do you understand those changes, and what can you do to make sure that you keep understanding how the industry, how the business landscape is changing. I might jump straight over there. So that leads into a question around tech strategy. And there are kind of three different spheres that feed into that, that play a role in how how you as a person working in this industry need to operate. One is understanding the business, and the way in which it operates and what it does, etc. Second one is the technology that is available to you in operating your business. And the third thing is the community that you're operating with, the people. And that doesn't just mean, by community, I don't mean just the broader social community. I mean the people you're working with within the organisation, your customers, your clients, your competitors, and the broader community. So they're the kind of three key elements that feed into the whole question of the role or into technology strategy. And if you ignore any one of them and don't have an understanding of that, things go wrong. So if you understand your users, in other words, or clients, in other words, the community, and you've got a good business model, but your technology isn't working, then you become inefficient. There are lots of organisations that understand their users and have a good business model, but the use of technology is atrocious. They haven't adapted the technology well, and so they're inefficient. If you've got users and good technology to apply to it, but you don't understand the business model, in other words, if you were developing a Airbnb type business, but you didn't understand the nature of that business and how it worked, then you get problems with monetization. In other words, problems with understanding how you make an effective business. And if you've got a good handle on your business and you're on top of the technology, but you don't understand your users or your clients, then you've got users who are frustrated and they won't be interested. So you need to kind of get all three of those lined up and understand all of them. And the project that we're going to get you to do in this subject does that. It basically says, pick a company, find a technology that they're not using at the moment but potentially could, and explore the role that plays. And in doing that, that means you also need to understand the community, what the users, how the users will respond to it. So in terms of, that's kind of big picture. What does that mean for you as individuals? Essentially, organisations, people who might employ you, some of you will have jobs, some of you won't yet, but some of you will want to change jobs, get different career paths. But any company that you are likely to go and work for is going to want IT people who have good technology skills and can understand it. But even more, they want people who understand how the organisations work and the role that IT can play within that. It's all well and, it's great, fine being a fantastic programmer, but that's a low-level role. If you want to progress, you need to kind of understand how businesses operate, what the business processes are, how businesses will change as a result of technology, how they can change, and how that happens rapidly, what customers and client expectations are. If you're going to use the technology, what do people want out of it? And what value that can bring to the business. So those concepts are going to run right through this subject. And so a key part of that for you is going to be understanding the language. You can only really become effective as a person working in this field if you understand. Anyway, one of the really hard things is often you'll see terms and they'll confuse you endlessly. It'll be interesting to know when you look at this slide how many of these terms you know. I'm sure all of you will know, hopefully all of you will know what a data center is, or at least a little bit might know what it is. Most of you will probably know what capture means. BYOD, bring your own device. A lot of you will know what AWS is, or a back end. Some of you might know what a CMS is. So a few of you might know what maybe more will know what ERP is. So in other words, there's a whole bunch of terms in here that, or BDR, there's a good one that probably some of you will know, but not me, but a lot of you won't. One of the really important things is not to be scared of the technology, not to be scared of the language or the terms. So one of the things we're going to do in this subject is try to help you develop an ability to not be scared of the language, because technology has huge numbers of acronyms and terms that and it can become quite scary if you're not used to it. So one of the things we want you to do is to get used to those. So we're going to throw lots of terms at you and ask you to find out what they mean. So that's kind of where I wanted to get to briefly. That's a very, very quick overview of where the subject is going to go and the context of it. As I said, the key is about understanding the nature of the industry. You can't really understand your role until you understand the industry. So we're going to spend a lot of time saying, how is the industry evolving? What are the key kind of elements? And then what does that mean for you? That's basically the first part of the subject. The lecture this evening. We'll have a little break for 10 minutes. It's now just before 10 to 7 Sydney time. We'll have a break for 10 minutes. That'll give you a chance to go and get up from your desk or your lounge or your bed, wherever you are listening to this. Go and stretch your legs, have a break, get a drink, and then after the break, we've got a guest presenter, Huda. I haven't looked at the attendance list yet, but I think hopefully Huda will be online. If she's not, she will be very shortly. And who's going to have a chat to you about her role and things like that. So I'll pause the recording and we'll see you everyone back here in about 10 minutes time.
And hopefully some time for questions at the end. But as always, if there are any questions, please feel free to just let David know and he can interrupt me as I'm talking. So quick intro into Atlassian. I don't know how many of you have heard about us, but we are a Atlassian founded tech company that was founded back in 2002. And our co-founders are Scott Farquhar and Mike Cannon-Brooks. And they basically had this kind of vision of trying to build software in order to help teams collaborate. And that kind of fits really well into the company mission because at the basic level behind every great achievement that humans have ever done, be it getting to the moon or, building rocket ships or building cochlear implants for kids, there's always been a team of people behind it. And so our company's mission is to unleash the potential in every team. So it's quite admirable, if I may say so myself. And so that's exactly what it is that we do. We build software tools for teams. It's our bread and butter. It's what we've been doing since 2002. It's what we'll continue to do for a very long time. And the really awesome thing about building software for teams is that you can basically impact every single industry there is. So you'll see on this screen, like some of the different companies that are our customers, and you'll notice that they range from, entertainment industries like Warner Brothers to like things to do with currency like Visa. You have things like Nokia and the Hilton Hotel. And each of these different customers are in completely different industries. You've got hospitality, entertainment, car manufacturing. they all use our products. And so it's pretty awesome to be able to work for a company where the things I get to work on every day can impact so many people in the world. And I get to do that from the comfort of my own home now, since starting to work remote, which is kind of the cherry on top. And so I've kind of spoken about like building software for teams, but what exactly is this software that we build? Our flagship product is a product called Jira. It comes in like 3 different flavors at its basis. And Jira is, to put it simply, is a issue tracker on steroids. It's where you go to manage tickets, to manage things that you want to work on. Jira Service Desk is great for managing requests that other people have for your team. So, if you're an IT team who handles, I need a new laptop requests, or, I've lost a cable, I need a new cable, the other people in your team can come in and put in requests through Jira Service Desk so that there's a log of what people need. And then you can kind of get data about all that. There's a whole heap of other products that we have too, though. This isn't the full list. So Confluence is our online wiki. We have Trello, which is another issue tracker, Bitbucket for code things. Stride is one that we've actually decommissioned now. And so the reason I kind of left it up there is because as a company, we don't always, have successes. Like there are certain stories where, yes, we try to enter into the instant messaging space. But you know what? It was one where we didn't end up making it, and Slack ended up, kind of being the go-to that we now use for that instead. So even at the scale of our company, there are still kind of bets that we make that don't always pan out, but we never let it kind of stop us. We keep going, and as a company, you need to be adaptable for that. Then we have things like Status Page and Atlassian Marketplace are other things that we do. Status Page being around like DevOps style things. Atlassian Marketplace being this entire ecosystem where third-party developers can create add-ons for our products. So that's like a quick overview into some of the products that we make. Currently, we are mainly remote. Our Sydney office is starting to open up. Pre-COVID, we did also have, we still have offices in Manila, Gdańsk, Amsterdam, a whole heap of other places in the world. A lot of them are currently empty, sadly. Sydney is open for whoever needs to go in because their work set up at home isn't up to scratch, or they just miss the, social interaction from being in an office. But there is now a big push for people to choose to work remotely if they want. And so that's been great because it means that people now have the freedom to kind of live wherever they kind of want to live, but also still get to work for Atlassian. So that's like my intro into Atlassian. A bit more about myself. As I've mentioned, I graduated from the University of Sydney back in 2014, I believe it is. And I graduated with a Bachelor of Engineering majoring in software and a Bachelor of Science majoring in mathematics. So I did a double degree. And so since graduating, I joined Atlassian, and my role right now is a senior software engineer on the measurement platform team. So working on a platform team means that the tooling and the products that I work on are quite internal to Atlassian itself. Our direct customers are Atlassian products or Atlassians themselves. But the really cool thing about working on a team like this is that I get to work with other developers, but then also with product managers, and our team specifically, because we're around the measurement space, gets to work with some data scientists, which is super cool because we then have, our resident data experts who we can chat to about, are we actually showing teams the right data? Are we providing them with the right insights to make decisions into what to build? And so in terms of what it is I actually work on, my team owns kind of 2 main domains in Atlassian. The first one is analytics. So we own a service called the analytics service. nice name, which basically is responsible for processing every single analytic event that comes out of our cloud products. So think about it as every time someone clicks on a button in any of our products, there's this event that gets fired to tell us a person clicked on this button. Every time a page is loaded, every time a person interacts with a certain page, there's these events that get triggered that then get sent through to our service, which is responsible for processing these events and then sending them down to different data lakes, so like different basically databases eventually, where the data gets stored. So then other teams can query it to understand how their products are being used. And so if you are someone who's building a new feature, one of the way that you understand about how people are using this feature is by looking at the analytics. Are they, if it's a 3-step process, are they getting through all 3 steps? Do you see the right analytic events? Or are you seeing only events for the first 2 steps and then a sudden drop off? That could indicate that there's an issue between step 2 and 3, or that maybe step 3 isn't useful. And so that's how that data gets used currently. The second thing that my team owns is the domain of feature flags within the company. So feature flags, for those who don't know, are a way of turning features on and off, basically with a click of a button. So rather than having to do a deployment every time you want to release a new feature, you basically release it behind a feature flag, and then you can control how much of your customer base gets access to this feature using the flag configuration. So you can say, let's say we want to release a change that changes the color scheme from being the Atlassian blue to we want to trial a purple theme. Rather than releasing it to everyone in one go, we might release it to only 10% of our customer base. So then we can track the analytics that come out of that 10% and see, are they interacting with the product more or less? We can then run some, customer feedback surveys being like, hey, we noticed that you have the new purple theme. Did you enjoy it more than the blue? Get that feedback and then make a decision. Should we continue rolling this feature out? And should we kind of push that slider from 10 to 100%? Or should we push it back down to 0 and turn it off and reassess what we're building? So my team owns the service that kind of handles that logic. And then the products implement the features that they want to implement behind these feature flags. So I find it quite interesting working on a platform team, but some people prefer to work directly on the products. Depends what you want to do. The reason I enjoy what my team does is the scale of our services. I work on multi-region microservices that process millions of requests, per hour, billions of events per day. So we're talking large scale here. We have each of our services is hosted across multiple geos. So, the analytics service, for example, is hosted in the US, it's hosted in the EU, it's hosted in Asia Pacific, and within each of those regions, it's hosted across multiple different AZ zones and stuff like that. So there's some really interesting challenges when you get to work on microservices that are split up that much. And there's a lot of learning there. And this is something that I kind of got a very small insight into when I first joined Atlassian. And then as we started building these services, got to get involved in the design aspect of designing these services, which was super cool. My team is a full stack team, so there's opportunities for back-end and front-end work. I like to know a little bit about a lot of things, so this is perfect for me because it means I get to do some back-end work one day, some front-end work another day. And then finally, it's kind of special because we get to provide value, but not only for Atlassians, but for our customers. Because we're capturing these analytic events, we can then make informed decisions as to whether the things that we're building are actually beneficial for our customers. We can help pick up on signals on whether or not the things that we are shipping, are they actually causing, friction for our customers? If they are, they can then use feature flags to turn those features off and let them get back to using the previous experience, which was a better one for them. On the flip side, if we find that a new feature is being super useful, we can then expedite how quickly we roll it out so that we're providing value to customers a lot faster. So that for me is super awesome. So that's kind of specifically about me and what I do at Atlassian, but just as kind of a bit of an overview about engineering at Atlassian itself. Being a software engineer, one of the biggest things that people think of is like, oh, all you do is code. And that's definitely a big part of the role, but it's not all of it. If I kind of put it down simply, it's about working as a team to solve complex problems. And this includes having, design discussions. It involves having like pairing sessions when you are coding to help upskill other members of your team, but it also involves understanding what you are building and that whether what you're building is the right thing to build for your customers. And so the best engineers at Atlassian are always the ones that ask questions to make sure that we're building the right thing. Yes, okay, maybe we do want to build this super fancy feature that is super technically complicated, but is it actually solving the problem that we need it to solve for where we want to go with our platform and where we want to go as a company, but then also for what our customers want. And that is always kind of tricky because sometimes it means making a decision that isn't, the super cool way of doing things or, the nice tech, like the best technical way to do things, but it ends up meaning that you are building the right thing for your customers in the end. And so for me, a typical week in my life as an engineer, and this is pretty similar to anyone who is in my role, there is still technical work. There is still code to be written. There is still PRs to be reviewed, pairing sessions, having like design meetings around architecture. All that stuff is why I enjoy being a software engineer. But as I mentioned, it's not everything. There's also team rituals. There's also things like sprint planning. You have demos. You have retrospectives to make sure, hey, like, let's reflect on the last 2 weeks. Is there anything we can improve in order to make sure that as a team, we're working really well together? One really cool thing that I didn't know companies did was this concept of a war game, is what we call them at Atlassian. But it's basically where you intentionally break your service in staging and then see how your team would react to the alerts and the alarms that go off. And then from how your service reacts, you go and you will either create some action items on improving your service so that it handles this particular type of failure. So an example could be, what would happen if all of a sudden we see a huge spike in requests per second to our service? Will it scale up fast enough? What happens if all of a sudden our database disappears? Does the service completely die, or is it able to understand that something is wrong, and will it trigger the correct alarms? And that just helps you build more resilient microservices. So they're always a bit like tense because you know that something's going to go wrong because someone behind the scenes is breaking things, but they're also super interesting because you get to learn about, how to build resilient services. Feature leading is an interesting one. It's a role that we have at Atlassian where you are responsible for basically leading a project, and it's a pretty big project if you're asked to feature lead. It's generally not something that's super small. And your role as a feature lead is responsible for like scoping out the work and then being kind of the coordinator between like your dev team and then the leadership team. So I'm currently feature leading a project which has to do around the feature flagging portion of what my team does. And I personally find it super interesting to be a feature lead because it means that you kind of get a bit of that like team lead side of things because you do have a team that works with you, but you also still are involved in a lot of the like nitty-gritty technical discussions. And so that's something that a lot more of our like senior devs tend to take on, but we do encourage a lot of our more junior devs to also give it a try because it's a really great learning opportunity for them. And then finally, we have all the other stuff that comes with being an Atlassian. Being a developer, if you're working on our cloud products, you're expected to go on call for any of the services that you own. So for me, it's once every, I think it's 11 weeks now, because my team is a team of 11. You go on call if your service is acting up, you will get woken up if it is the middle of the night. Otherwise, you will get an alert on your phone being like, you need to look into what's going on. Participating in interviews is something that I also do. So, being the interviewer, helping shape how interviews are being held at Atlassian is something that's super interesting to me, and something that I'm super passionate about, because I think having a good interview experience is something that's important. And then also just participating in different focus groups whenever the opportunities come up, just to help make sure that if there is things that we can fix, my team's voice is heard. I'm going to be super quick about this one. Why I picked Atlassian. For me, it was the Atlassian values. They're the 5 that you see on the screen. Atlassian is the only place I've ever worked. So I started at Atlassian as a grad over in 2015. So as soon as I finished uni, I joined Atlassian. I did do internships throughout my degree, however. So from those experiences, Atlassian is the only company I've ever worked for where every single employee can read out these values for you off by heart. Like, we truly live by these values. We will be in a meeting and you will hear people mention these values. And for me, that's amazing, because each one of these values is something that I resonate with. You always want to be shipping value to your customers. You want to be, play as a team is all about helping each other out when you need to. Open company is a great one, because it's all about being open with, not only as a company level, but also within your team. Some other cool things about Atlassian is that we have this thing called Ship It, which is we have 24 hours to kind of go nuts and innovate whatever we want. So it's similar to 20% time at Google, but it's within that short 24-hour block, which is always fun to participate in. And the Atlassian Foundation is all about giving back. So it's, the core thing of Atlassian is that we always do want to give back where we can, and that's where the 1% pledge comes from. So 1% of annual profits, 1% of employee time and company equity go towards the Atlassian Foundation. And so as an employee, I get 5 days of annual leave a year that I can use towards a foundation project, be it helping a charity get set up with, any technical stuff they need, to, cleaning out weeds somewhere in some endangered portion of the Sydney landscape. Which is always, it's always nice to give back. But yeah, that's my overview. I don't know if anyone has any questions.
Oh, sorry, I was just unmuting. I hadn't heard to ask. There's a couple of questions that appeared in the chat channel, and I'm probably going to misrepresent them to some extent, but I guess that's the privilege of the session. There was an interesting one. I saw a post in the chat, and then there were a couple of private messages in the chat to me with people who are saying, "Oh, this sounds fascinating. How do I get a job with Atlassian?"
Excellent question. So we do have our, if you just look up Atlassian.com, there is a careers page there. We have many different roles that we hire for. We hire interns, we hire graduates, and then we also hire full-time roles. And I think I just saw someone posting it in the thing. I just saw a little pop-up come up. So please go on there, check it out. In terms of internships and graduate positions, they should be, if they aren't open yet, they should be open in the next week or two, because we actually start our interview process quite early on in the year. So please check it out. Please apply. The process isn't too bad. It's submit your resume. There will be a recruiter will reach out, and then you kind of get told about the actual process itself.
So someone has asked about the different stages of the hiring process, and I think that's an interesting question, whether you're interested in Atlassian or not, but just that the hiring process more generally for any company. So Atlassian might be a good kind of example to use so that people know, how do you get into this industry? What's the kind of process? No,
definitely. I think hiring is one of those things that's always super abstract, especially when you're at uni, because unless you go through an interview process, you don't know what to expect. And I remember feeling that way when I was first applying. So what I can tell you about the Atlassian process is that it is a multi-step process. And so the phases are basically, originally it's like a phone screening interview, you know, like, why do you want to join Atlassian? Those kind of questions, like a get to know you call with a recruiter. From there, you enter into the kind of more specific streams for your role. So if you're a developer, you will go through a different interview process than if you're applying as a designer or as a support engineer. And keep in mind, Atlassian has many different roles. Like, we have security engineers, we have product managers, we have program managers. So take a look at our site, see which one of those interests you. I can give you an insight into the dev specific interview steps. I don't know what the ones are for other roles. But for developers, it's basically, you will get coding interviews. So you will be in a Zoom call with an Atlassian engineer. They will give you a coding question, and it's just kind of like pair programming. We don't want it to be intense. We want it to be one where if you have a question, you ask it, but basically just explain your thought process as you're coding. It's language agnostic, so you pick whatever language you're most comfortable with. There's usually 2 of those, and they're usually back to back. From there, there's a system design phase, which is the next kind of interview. That one is more about, like, if you needed to design a system, how would you design it? So I think, you know, like databases and you know, like APIs and stuff. That is what we do for, like, that's the more back-end specific system design. There is also a system design for front-end roles. So just kind of maybe flag whether you're more interested in back-end or front-end. But if you have questions about that kind of stuff, the recruiter can give you way more insight than I can. I'm more on the back-end interviewing panel thing. And then after that, there's a values and management question, which is, I like to run them as more of a conversation than anything, where we just like to kind of get to know you a bit more. We'll give you some open-ended questions, you know, and then see where it goes, you know, come up with some follow-up questions. It's really like, you know, give us an example about a time where you were working in a team and this happened or whatever, those style questions. And so it sounds daunting because there are multiple steps, but it's just to kind of make sure that we're assessing you on each of your different skills, because some people might be really great at coding. They've never done system design, so they're not too sure what to do there. And then they do amazingly well in values and management. And so we want to make sure that when we interview our candidates, we're not only always hiring the ones that are amazing at coding, because if there's someone that's amazing at system design, we want them too. And so it's really just to kind of understand where your skills are. Sorry, that was a pretty long-winded answer, but I hope that helped.
No, I think that was fantastic. Actually, there's a couple of other quick questions that have appeared in the channel. One said, do international students have a chance with Atlassian or Atlassian internships?
Great question. The last I heard was that they weren't. However, that was due to needing like visas to work from Sydney. So I don't know if that's changed because of the remote policy. So the best thing you can do is there should be like a contact us thing on the careers page or somewhere. Is just to email our recruitment team, or find one of our recruiters on LinkedIn and message them, because they would be the best person to ask. If you can't find them on LinkedIn, find me on LinkedIn, ask me, like prod me, and then I can ask one of our recruitment team members for you to clarify, because I recall the answer being no, but this was pre-COVID. So there is a chance it may have changed, but I also don't want to like get anyone's hopes up. The case is different for full-time roles. However, I do know that kind of changes at that level.
Someone's asked a technical question. Does Jira run on Spring and Vue? What's the kind of back end or the underlying tech?
Jira. Okay, so I don't work on Jira. So I'm trying to remember from the last time I contributed to that code base. It's definitely not Vue. I don't know if they use Spring either, actually. Like so my team uses Spring Boot for our Java-based projects. For our Node-based ones, our front end is like React, GraphQL, that kind of stuff. I'm not sure about Jira though. It's Jira. So Jira's backend is Jira's code base. The backend is Java. I just don't know if they use Spring Boot. I'm sorry, I haven't contributed to the Jira backend repo in about 4 years now, so I'm blanking.
So, I'm jumping back around different bits just to try to kind of get a sense of how all these things kind of pick around about different topics to give it.
Yeah, of course.
One of the things that I found really interesting was your comments about kind of using analytics, and particularly the extent to which that allows you to monitor the value that's being provided for customers. And so there's kind of a really interesting question there about how you link what you're doing with that business value. And so I guess there was a question that got posed about examples of what that might look like. In other words, how does that sense of a focus on business value appear kind of internally within the company?
Yeah, so as a company, we have it's called basically like key results. So key things that we want to achieve for this year, but then there's also kind of longer term ones for the next couple of years. And so then each kind of team within the company has their own objectives that they want to reach, that either directly or indirectly impact the company goals. So, if one of the company goals is improve performance, some teams might have a direct goal, which is, get Jira's performance, time to interactive value from being X milliseconds to something smaller than X milliseconds. And so then that particular team, their goal is to just fix Jira's performance. A team like mine might then come in and be like, well, we can't impact Jira's performance because we don't work on Jira. We're a platform team. What we can do, however, is give the Jira team extra metrics so that and extra data so that they can then measure the performance impacts that they're making. And so it all kind of works in that way, because it comes down to like whatever the company goals are and then kind of filters down from there. I hope that kind of answered
yeah, definitely.
that for you. Yeah.
Can I ask step sideways again? You talked about Stride not being a success, and I don't want to focus on
That's fine.
you weren't successful, but that kind of raises an interesting question about how you exit gracefully from things like that. How you manage kind of end of life. Every technology has an end of life at some point, and so that kind of gives a good. Is there an example there of how you manage that end of life of a product gracefully?
Look, I wasn't involved in any of the Stride work. The one thing I do recall, however, super clearly is that all of our communications that happened internally about it was about we want this to be as painless as we possibly can for our customers. And like when you are end-of-lifing anything, and even if it's an internal platform tool that Atlassian uses, right? You want to give whoever's using it enough notice so that, number one, it's not a shock. It's not, by the way, we're turning this off tomorrow. But then you also want to be there to support them with, if they have any questions, if there's any uncertainty, it's, you want to have an avenue of communication open. It's not, hey, we're end-of-lifing this product, see yous, and then leave. It's, hey, sadly, due to this reason, we've decided to make the really difficult decision to end of life, whatever it may be. If you have any further questions, we have a dedicated, email that you can reach out to, or a dedicated service desk you can open tickets against, and, we have a team ready to answer your questions. to take it even further, you then go and provide them with support on options of migrating away. So, hey, we are end of life in this, but this is what we're doing in order to help you move from us to certain options, So you never want to kind of have leave a bad taste in people's mouths. You want to try and do it as painlessly as you possibly can. And as with anything, you're never going to do a perfect job. There will always be, things that don't go as smoothly as we ever would like. But in the end, as long as you have enough of your, support team, they're ready to answer questions, ready to help people. It goes as smoothly as it can, I guess.
Can I ask? Someone asked in the chat channel a question, but I want to rephrase it. They asked what kind of programming languages you mostly use. But can I also ask how that's changed over the course of your time at Atlassian? Have you always used the same one? Does it evolve? Do you need to learn another one every 6 months? Do you?
Yeah. So Atlassian has the idea of kind of like they're called tech stacks. So it's what are the not really approved, but they're the recommended stacks to use. So you'll notice that like a lot of services at Atlassian tend to be written in things like Java. Some are in Kotlin. So Kotlin's kind of the new one that's coming up for those server side things. But then you do also have things that are written in, Node, for example. Some teams also use Go and Python, not as many. Our observability team uses Go heavily. They would be our Go experts. The front end side of things is a lot of JavaScript. So React is kind of the go-to framework for us at the moment. We started adopting it a couple of years ago, and it's worked out really well for us. In terms of API stuff, some teams use REST, some teams use GraphQL. So there is a variety. However, you won't see any functional programming. You won't see anything written in Scala or Haskell unless it was written maybe 6 years ago, because there was a time where Scala and Haskell services were starting to be a thing at Atlassian. But we realized very quickly that it's very hard to, number one, upskill developers in those languages very quickly when you need to. And number two, it's very hard to hire developers that are familiar with those languages. And so when it does come to kind of picking what language you build a service in, it's, there is certain freedoms, but in the end, you need to pick something that if at any given time you need to suddenly onboard a new developer onto your service, any existing Atlassian can kind of pick it up. It can't be, you need to have this super specialized person come in.
It's not just about which is technically the best language. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so ideally it would be which is technically the best, but sometimes you kind of you will always need to balance it out with maintainability, with onboarding new members onto a team, because in the end you can have the most technically correct service that you can possibly build. If no one can understand how it's written or maintain it, that is costing that in itself is a huge issue, because if that service starts acting up for some reason or needs new features added to it and no one can do that work, you haven't really solved any problems. So my team, I'm super lucky because my team does have variety in the coding languages that some of our services are written in. So as I mentioned, we have our backend services are mainly in Java. It's awesome because one of them uses functional Java, so that's kind of cool, like Java RX, like reactive Java, which was kind of interesting to learn. It was, okay, I get Java, but now we were learning reactive Java, which was another thing to kind of wrap your head around. And then we also have a service that is, a front end, has a front end, which is React, as I mentioned, GraphQL. We do have some clients that we own as well. So we have one that's written in Python, one that's written in Go, some that are written in Java and Node as well. so JS. So my team's kind of like there's a little bit of everyone kind of thing. Yeah.
Can I need to let you disappear off and get some dinner, I suspect, but can I ask two final questions?
Yeah.
Someone's asked about the work of testing department or testers. Can you talk a little bit about how that's kind of managed?
Excellent question. Atlassian does not have a specific testing or quality assurance team. That is part of our roles as developers. So whenever we build something, we are responsible for making sure it's tested properly, making sure it's QA'd properly, and then also for releasing it and monitoring it. So that's kind of different from how some other companies do it. Like some other companies, we know they have like their development team does work, they do a certain amount of testing, but then they pass it on to a QA team that does further deeper testing. That's not something that we have at Atlassian. Our development team takes on that entire scope of work. So for me to call a feature complete, I have to do the code, write the tests, ship it to staging. If it's a big enough change, do a QA demo in staging, get some other developers or other people on my team on board, walk them through it. They might ask me hey, can you see what happens if you do this? And then if you do this, if we find any issues, we will apply the fixes that we need to, go through that whole process again. And then release it to production. And then when it's in production, continue to monitor it. So look at those analytic events, look at any other monitoring that we have, like logs and that, to make sure that it's behaving as we expect. Yeah.
Thank you. And last question. Can you tell us a little bit about, from your perspective, what makes for an effective team member?
Oh, that's a great question. There's a couple things. Effective team members is a super important, like, I guess it's kind of a skill to have, but it's what makes or breaks a team. And for me, the most effective team members are ones that ask for help when they need it. So if you are stuck on something, don't be afraid to go to your team and be like, hey, I'm not quite sure how to do this. Can someone please help me? Can someone pair program with me? I really want to learn. Because if you are stuck on something and someone could have helped unblock you in a matter of 5 minutes, use up 5 minutes of that person's time and then, be able to continue working on what you need to work on. The flip side to that is be willing to help others when they need it. If you do notice that a team member is either struggling with something, or if the team itself could be doing things more efficiently, don't shy away from calling things out. If there's a team process that you find that is way too inefficient or could be done better, call it out, suggest it to the team, see what they think, because chances are someone else has probably thought about it too. They were just too shy to bring it up. And then the other one is all about kind of give and take. So differences of opinions will always happen. There is no team on the face of this earth that hasn't disagreed on how to solve a problem. The thing that makes for effective teams is where in the end, all they care about is the right end goal. They don't care whose solution was picked. They don't care whether it was their favorite tech stack that was picked. They don't care if, it means that it might be a bit less work for them or a bit more work for them. What they care about is that as a team, we're making the right decision for what we want to build. And so calling things out when they're not looking quite right, super useful, but also being willing to compromise and be flexible and work with your team to reach those decisions. That is what makes for effectiveness, because if all of a sudden you're spending 2 weeks trying to make a decision that could have taken you a day to make, if someone was just willing to be a bit more flexible, or, not stand their ground and be like, yes, this could be done if we use Java, but I want to use reactive Java because that's what I want to learn. Was that really worth 2 weeks of back and forth for? Usually no. And so, it's, I feel like those are the key things for me.
Fantastic. I think we need to let you go and have some dinner, but
all good.
Thank you, Huda. That's been fantastic. There's a bunch of other questions that I didn't get to and other things that I would have loved to ask, but I'm sure we've got a semester worth of guest presenters and things like that we can work through. But I think you've set a fantastic scene for us. One of the things I dislike the most about online classes is you can't in a lecture theatre you can get everyone to kind of give a really rousing round of applause, and that's a bit trickier. But I'm sure everyone here would join me in thanking you. I think you've done a great job and it's been incredibly helpful. So thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Okay.
And good luck with the rest of your semester.
Thanks, Huda.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks. Oh, there's a long list of thank yous appearing in the chat channel.
Oh, thank you so much. I hope you have an amazing evening. Take care, everyone.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, everyone. We might have a quick 10-minute break. It's now just 2:45, so 5 minutes to 8 Sydney time. I'll kick off again. We'll go through the admin for the subject, do all the kind of necessary, boring admin bits. So we'll come back in 10 minutes time. Okay, welcome back, everyone. My countdown timer hasn't quite finished. Hate to start too soon. Sorry, I've always got to make sure that I'm unmuted. Every so often during a class, I'll kind of mute myself during the break, come back, spend 3 minutes talking to everyone, and then realise that I'm still on mute and no one's got any idea that I've been talking, or that there's people have seen my mouth moving but haven't been able to hear me. So let me go back to my slides and bring those up. I noticed there was a question in the chat about the test next week. I'll come to that in a little while. I'll talk about what that is. So the last thing I want to do this evening is just run through the kind of the boring bits of admin for the unit, and explain how the kind of subject works and who's involved and all of those things. And then hopefully at the end of this evening, provide an opportunity for you to go and start to form groups and things like that. So where I'd like to start with that is some introductions. I meant to introduce kind of very briefly myself at the beginning. My name's David Lowe. I'll say a bit more about that in a moment, but the other staff who are involved, we have a pair of teaching assistants, Chartery and Revity, who are both fantastic and will help me kind of manage a subject with 300 plus students in it, and hopefully keep on top of the ed discussion forums and the quizzes and all the kind of admin bits of the unit, make sure that I'm not forgetting things. And usually for the kind of more difficult bits, either myself or Chartery or Revity will be kind of keying the questions. We also have 5 fantastic tutors. Some of you, most of you would have seen online Andrea and turned a video on before. I noticed she's still online. Oh, there we go. She's just, oh, no, I think she put a camera on, but it looks, there we go. So Dr. Andrea Stern, I introduced earlier, is far and away the most experienced of all of our tutors in a very good sense. She keeps putting a hand up to her chin. For those of you who can see her video, you'll notice that she's got a cast on her arm at the moment. She has a fantastic, or her daughter has a fantastic pet, very large pet dog, who caused a break in Andrea's wrist recently. But despite having a broken wrist, she's determined to come in and manage still manage the tutorials. Thank you, Andrea. So Andrea is wonderful and knows much more about this area than I do. So she's one of her roles is to tell me when I'm going, saying things that don't make sense. Our 4 other tutors, Chartery, Josh, Laxmi and Revity, are all wonderful as well. The 5 tutors have all worked as a team on both on other units in the past and do a great job. So whichever one of those is managing your tutorial, they'll do a fantastic job for you. And then there's you. We've got around about 300 students. The numbers are still settling down. I'm still trying to work out how many there are. About half of you are doing the Masters of IT. About 30% of you are doing the combined Master of IT, Master of IT Management. About 10% of you are in the graduate diploma, and then there's a scattering of students enrolled in various other things. About 1 in 5 of you are a continuing student, which means you've been at the university before, so this is all a bit boring for you. But most of you, 80% of you, are commencing, which probably means this is your first semester, and this may even be your very first class. If it is your first class, I meant to say this at the beginning and I forgot. There's so many things I'm trying to keep track of that I forget things. One of those, and the most important one, was to welcome you not only to this unit, but to the university as well. So if this is your first semester, and in particular if this is the first class you've had in this first semester, welcome, and I hope it goes wonderfully well. I've got a slide in there. I won't talk about it, but you can look at it later if you're interested. But my background is wasn't originally a software engineer. I was originally an electrical engineer that did bits of interesting things with software. And then I kind of migrated across into the software engineering somewhere along the line. For most of the last 8 years, I've been the Deputy Dean in the Faculty of Engineering, but I decided I enjoyed teaching too much and I wasn't getting to do enough teaching. So I kind of stopped that role at the beginning of last year and was supposed to be overseas traveling around Europe for all of last year, and then COVID hit. So I came back and went back to teaching sooner than I had expected, and I love it. And then there's a long list of other bits that I do as an academic in terms of research and things. I mentioned earlier that I do a lot of research in things like augmented reality and laboratory-based education and professional practice and interesting areas like that. But as I said, also said, is at the bottom of that slide, my TAs and tutors know much more about current industry practice than I do, and so they'll do a wonderful job in helping make sense out of this this unit. One of the key things is for any student in any course is the kind of the network that you have, other people that you can draw on and share ideas with, etc., and the support that you get. And that's important from a learning sense, but also just a support and wellbeing sense. In previous semesters, when everyone's been in the same lecture room together, one of the things that I would do is get you to turn to the person next to you and ask them a few questions. That's obviously somewhat tricky here. I can't get you to turn to the person next to you when it's a Zoom call, and so we're going to try something a little bit different to address that in a little while. So I'll come back to that. The subject itself, the admin, it's a whole lot of topics that are all about the nature of professional practice in the IT industry, and so that means things like IT life cycles and sourcing information and people and teams and communication and ethics in IT, etc. So we'll work through all of that over the space of this semester. There's a link there with a page on what students in CS and IS need to know by the time they graduate. You're all in a master's degree, so you've already all graduated, but it's a useful thing to go and have a read of anyway. I don't agree with everything that's in it, and I think there are some things that are missing from it, but it's still relatively good. But I would encourage you to have a read of it and think about what parts of it you're not sure about, what parts of it you agree with, and what things you think are missing. And then there's a whole lot of resources. All of the lecture slides that I'm using will always be put up on Canvas. And all of these classes will also be recorded. So we'll record them. We're trying a new system which automates the process of those going up on Canvas after the class. I'm not sure whether that's going to work properly. In previous semesters, it was a manual process for me to, after the class, I had to go and download the video off the cloud, process it, upload it to Canvas, prune out the bits that from the beginning to the end when I was blathering on to, about things that weren't relevant, etc. And that whole process might take anywhere from 6 hours to 20 hours. And so the recorded video wouldn't appear until usually the following day. Hopefully it'll be a little bit quicker this time, but I need to kind of work out and make sure that works. So at some point between 2 minutes after the class ends and 24 hours after the class ends, the recorded lecture will be available on Canvas. If you go to the Zoom link, you'll see there's a recordings tab, and it will either be there or you'll need to go to another link. But once I've done this first one and made sure it works, if it's not obvious, I'll post a link onto or a message onto Ed so that you can see where it is. I'll also put all of any information that's relevant, tutorials, all of the assignment instructions, etc. The one very bottom line there, the discussion forum, Ed, I know most of you have already now discovered that because I've been posting messages and seeing messages from you. That should always be the first port of call. If you've got a question, rather than emailing me or the tutors directly, post it on Ed, usually for two reasons. One is the question, if you've got a question, other people are likely to have the same question. And it's better to answer it once on Ed than to answer it 50 different times from 50 different email messages. So that's one reason. The other is that if you post it on Ed, you're much more likely to get a quicker response because I'm looking at Ed, the tutors are, the two TAs will be monitoring it, and often other students can respond. So if you post a link, a question on Ed, you're likely to get a much more rapid response because there are a lot more of us kind of looking at it and responding. So that should always be your first point of call. You should generally only email me or the tutors, the TAs, if it's something personal that shouldn't be kind of a broader question that everyone shouldn't see. The structure of the subject, by now you've already worked out that, hopefully worked out. The lectures are on Tuesdays from 7 till 9, except for this week when we started a week earlier. They'll always be on Zoom. They'll always be recorded. I'll usually break it into 2 halves, where there'll be a kind of a first half with kind of the kind of theory content type part, and then the second half will be a guest presenter like Huda or others, or a case study that I work through that looks at how you apply it. Generally, they'll be kind of 50 minutes each with a 10-minute break in the middle, but they might change a bit depending upon the week and how much there is to say on each of those areas. The tutorials, we've obviously been juggling numbers in those because the numbers of enrolled students kept growing, and that meant that some of the tutorials filled up and we put more on, etc. Hopefully that's mostly now sorted out. The tutorials are all on either Monday or Tuesday, online or face-to-face, mostly online. There's only a couple of face-to-face ones. And it's important that you attend those, particularly because there's group work. And if you're not there, it makes it very difficult for your team members. One of the key things to keep in mind is that I passionately believe that all of you are responsible learners, that you're here studying this because you're interested in it and that you think it's valuable and you want to get as much out of it. And that means that there's certain kind of expectations that I've got. One is that you attend the classes as appropriate and that you put the relevant time into the subject, etc. If something comes up that makes that difficult, talk to your tutor or talk to me and we'll work out how to handle it. Don't just kind of let it slide. Let us help you, but we will be assuming that you will ask. So we'll try to kind of track it and monitor it, and may send emails to you or messages to you if we think that you're, if we can detect that you're struggling. But with a class of 300, that can be a bit tricky. We also expect everyone to participate constructively, and that means that you respect everyone. Not everyone has the same level of understanding yet as you, or the same experience, and people see things differently. It's fine to critique and ask questions about ideas, but not to criticise people. So you need to, a really important thing is that everyone respects each other and have some humility. None of us know it all. There are things that a lot of you will know that I don't. Some things that I know that you don't. Some things that I know that Andrea doesn't. Many things that she knows that I don't. And part of the reason for being here is that we can learn from each other. One of my key roles is kind of guiding that process. But one of the things I love about teaching is that I get to learn things from all of you as well. Check Canvas and Ed regularly, at least once a week, but ideally more often. Let us know when there are any problems, and make sure you keep your group members informed about problems and don't just kind of give up and disappear. The assessment subject. This kind of gets into the detail. There are 3 main assessment components. Actually, I might start in the middle, just because that's the easiest one. At the end of the semester, in the exam period, there is a final exam. That will be a 2-hour formal written exam. In previous years, that was always kind of you come in and sit down in a big hall and do an exam and then hand it in. Because of COVID, it means that will be online, but the university has processes for managing online written exams to ensure that, not that I believe any of you would wish to behave inappropriately, but to kind of track it and make sure that any problems like that do get detected. That's worth 40% of the subject, and so we'll talk a lot more about that later in the semester to give you a sense of what that might involve. So you don't really need to worry about that for the moment. The bit that will be ongoing, the two other parts happen through the semester. The first one of those is a set of weekly quizzes, and essentially that revolves around 2 things. Each week we will give you 2 things to do. One is some terms, and these are already up on Canvas. If you can't find them, post them on Ed and I or someone else will tell you where on Canvas it is. But there's a list of weekly readings and a list of weekly concepts or terms. The two things you need to do. You need to read that article. Those articles are selected very carefully to help you gain an insight into the nature of the industry that we're all working in. Some of them are quite tricky, but they are selected to kind of get you thinking. When you read it, I would encourage you to read it earlier rather than later, because then if you've got questions about it, you can post them on Ed and say, oh, there was this bit in this week's reading that I kind of struggled with, or it didn't make sense to me. What did anyone else, what did other people think of it, etc. So each week there is one paper that you need to read, and that will relate to the lecture for that week. So it'll kind of give you each of them are picked to kind of tie into that week's topics. And then there's a bunch of terms. And we want you to go and work out and find out what those terms mean, and develop an understanding of what they are. So there might be a term that might be CRM, customer relationship management. What is that? What does it mean? Is it a type of software? Is it a type of process? We want you to go and research that term and develop an understanding of it. And again, you can trigger discussions on Ed about it. Each week from now on, at the beginning of the lecture, there will be a very short 5-minute quiz that will involve 5 quick multiple choice questions. So each one of those should only take you, 20 seconds. Read the question, here it is, answer it. So there will be 5 questions, 5 minutes, and you'll be asked to answer those 5 multiple choice questions. Each question is worth half a mark, which means you get a mark out of 2.5. Because it's multiple choice, it can be marked automatically, so you can get a mark almost immediately. And everyone will get different questions. So you'll get 2 questions that will ask about the concept definitions, and 3 that ask you something about the paper and the ideas that came out of it. So there'll be more than 5 questions in the pool. There'll be a big pool of questions, and each student will get a random set of 5 of those. At the end of the semester, we'll have one of those quizzes at the beginning of every lecture. So you need to turn up, even if you want to watch the recorded lecture rather than turn up the whole thing, you need them to be there at the beginning for that. That will happen automatically at 5 minutes past, what time does the class start? 7 o'clock. So at 7:05, the quiz will get enabled, and 10 past 7, it will stop. So you need to do it in that window. There'll be 12 of those. We've got 12 more weeks after this one. So there'll be 12 quizzes. You don't have to do all 12 because we only count your 8 best scores. If you end up only doing 8, they're the 8 that we count. If you do 12, we'll throw away your 4 worst ones. If you got 2.5 out of 2.5 for the first 8, then you can quite happily say, oh, I don't need to do the next 4. It might be good to do them anyway, because then you can make sure that you kind of know those concepts as well. So that happens at the beginning of every class. The other reason for can you best 8 is it means if there's a particular week where for some reason you can't turn up, or there's been a problem, it doesn't matter because you only need to do 8 of them. So that happens each week. There's 8 of those times 2.5 marks. That means that's worth 20% of the subject. The third assessment component is a group project. You'll form groups of 4 students. All 4 students need to be in the same tutorial so that you can work together during the tutorial. There's been some discussion on Ed already about a few people who would be keen to change tutorial groups. Because the tutorials are all very full, I've said you can change, but only if you can swap with someone. So if you're not in a group already and you see a message from someone who's keen to come into your tutorial group, you might think about being nice to them and saying, oh yes, I can swap with you. If you have friends and you want to form a group, that's great. If there's only 2 or 3 of you, you can form a group of 2 or 3, and then we'll add another 1 or 2 students to make your group 4. And if you don't have a group and you can't find anyone, then that's not a problem. We'll put you into groups anyway. But we'll start that process this evening by helping you to kind of meet the other members of your tutorial and see if you can kind of find people that you think might be good group members. The group project contains 3 parts. Part A is an initial specification of your project. Part B is the major report. And then Part C are individual video presentations. So we won't be doing the presentations live. We'll get you to video it and submit it. And then we'll choose some of the really interesting ones to potentially present in the last week. The project is basically, we'll tell you more about this in the tutorials next week, but basically, and there's guidelines online as well. Essentially, you pick a company, an existing real company that you can find out enough about and is complex enough to create some interesting opportunities. Then you need to identify a technology that can be adopted and used by that company in some way that they're not currently using. It can either be a really new technology, or it can be kind of an existing one that they haven't used yet. And they say, and your role is to work out how that technology can be adopted to change the way in which that company works in some way to add value to it. And I talked earlier about the importance of that core element in technology, in computer technology, about being the value that it brings. And that's kind of at the core of this. What value can that technology bring? What risks does it present, but also what value does it bring? And we'll work through that a lot more over the course of the semester. And that group project is worth 40 marks. The initial submission in week 6, which is the preliminary kind of outline of this, is worth 10 marks. The major report at the end is worth 20. And then your individual presentations are worth 10. And we'll tell you more about each of those components as it becomes relevant. Just a quick reminder, late assessments. You can hand your work in late, but there is if you don't have a valid reason, there is a penalty that gets applied. One thing to be careful of is when you get near a deadline, Canvas can get slow. So saying, oh, I went to hand my assignment in at 2 minutes to midnight, and surprisingly, it took 10 minutes to upload, so it's now late. You've got to think about making sure you submit it in plenty of time to kind of avoid issues like that. I think that's just part of good professional practice. And then there's a whole set of slides here that I won't go through in detail, but the university has a lot of processes for dealing with issues when there are problems. If you get sick, there's a process for special consideration. You need to follow the right processes for those. So the really single most important message around this is that if something happens or goes wrong, follow up quickly. Don't just sort of think, oh, it's all going to be okay, and then find out 3 weeks later that it's a problem and by then it's too late. Because there are deadlines for when you need to apply for special consideration, etc. If there are problems, talk to your tutor, talk to me, and we'll tell you how to manage these things. And the other, one last kind of key administrative thing is around academic integrity. The university takes academic integrity really important, really seriously rather. Essentially, the core element, there's a whole range of things, but the core aspect is not doing anything that means that you could be misrepresenting what is your work. So, copying a chunk of text out of a paper on the internet, putting it into your own report is fine, provided you quote it and say, I took this work from there and, I'm using it. Copying it into your own thing without referencing it and in a way that lets us know that it's not your work isn't okay. Even if you think that, oh yeah, that's what I think, so it should be okay to include it, because it's not your work. So the key thing is making sure that we know what's your work and what isn't. If you don't, it can create enormous problems for you. There is an online university unit called AM1001, which goes through this process and gives lots of examples and says, do you think this would be plagiarism? Do you think this would be dishonest? So that you can get a really good sense of what is and what isn't. And it's crucial that even if you think you know, go through that and make sure. It's better to know that you got it right than accidentally make a mistake and then get in trouble because you've copied something that you shouldn't, even though you might have thought it was okay. Normally there's a slide at the beginning of the semester about emergency procedures and what to do when you need to evacuate. That's not relevant for almost all of you, except for probably the 30 students who are going to be in face-to-face tutorials. That's a fairly standard process. The one difference is normally when you evacuate a building because of an emergency, you go to a designated evacuation site. The university has changed its policy in that regard, and now it basically says because of COVID, you don't all cluster in one place, but you spread out. So there's a link there to information. If you are doing one of the online tutorials, have a look at that, make sure you understand what happens if something goes wrong in the building. And obviously COVID. Again, most of you are online, so this isn't still highly relevant to you, but it's just not relevant to you being on our campus. But for those of you who are, all the usual kind of COVID things about washing your hands regularly and appropriate distancing and all of those sorts of things. So that's essentially all I wanted to talk about. There's some more slides in the slide pack. Have a look at those. If you've got questions, let us know. The last thing that we wanted to do in the final half an hour of today is to get you to have a look at and play in a tool called GatherTown. One of the problems with Canvas, which we're using now, is it kind of is vaguely okay for a big lecture like this. It's a bit of a problem for tutorials because you can have kind of 30 students in a Zoom call and you can get interactions between the 30 of them. And it does have breakout rooms, but it's very difficult for a tutor to kind of interact with you and for you to kind of have to interact with other students one-on-one without being explicitly put into breakout rooms. We think GatherTown, which is this online tool, might actually allow us to manage that a bit better. So we're going to try it. I've had a few students tell me that they've used it in other contexts and they had problems with it, that it was a bit laggy and that it didn't go with numbers. What we'd like to do is try it. We'll try it this evening, and if it works kind of okay, then we will run all of the online tutorials next week in GatherTown rather than in Zoom. And then we'll get some feedback. And if the feedback is, yes, it worked really well, then we'll stay with GatherTown for the rest of the semester. If there was a problem and the video didn't work and the audio kept breaking up and it lagged and people had trouble on certain devices, then we'll go back to using Zoom. But we'll try it next week, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, then we'll drop back to Zoom. What I'd like to do this evening is get you to try it out. There's some instructions on Canvas. So if you haven't sent a message, a couple of announcements earlier that you should have a look at those. If you haven't yet, go to Canvas and look at the instructions. There's some questions in there that we want you to ask your team members, your other students in your tutorial. But in essence, once we finish here and end the Zoom call, we want all, I can't see the numbers now, 271 of you who are in this Zoom call to leave the Zoom call, to go into GatherTown, and for those of you who haven't had a look yet, there's a big main room that you drop into when you first appear. Actually, so when you first go to that link, it'll take you through a very short mini tutorial that says click on this and try this and look at this thing, just so you can see the basic elements. and then you go through a door into the main room. And then if you go to the bottom of that main room, you can see doorways into each tutorial. So you should go to whichever room is relevant to your tutorial, and you'll find hopefully 30 other students, 29 other students in that room. And we want you to wander around and have a chat to them, talk to people, ask them where they come from. There's a set of questions in the guide that's on Canvas, and we want to see who can kind of answer those and come up with the most responses. The tutors, if they haven't joined yet, they'll all be online. I'm not sure whether they'll come into Zoom calls or whether they'll just go straight to GatherTown. But the tutors will drop in. But because each of the tutors has 2 or 3 tutorial classes, they may not be in your room straight away. They may be in the other tutorial room class that they're managing, but they will come into your tutorial room at some point in the next half an hour and just say hi to you and ask if there's any questions. So we'll give all of that a go. I'll put a message up on Ed later tonight or tomorrow, just saying, is there any feedback? Were there any problems, etc. Tonight's just an opportunity for you to have a quick chat to the other members in your tutorial and to meet your tutor. So we'll get you to do that, and we'll see how it goes. And I'll come into GatherTown and wander across each of the rooms and just say hi to everyone and make sure that it's all hopefully going okay. It might be a bit chaotic at the start because 300 students all dropping into the main room in GatherTown. There'll be a lot of people all there at the same time. Some of you may have already done that, been there already, but we'll see how that goes. Other than that, thank you. If you've got questions, find me or your tutor in GatherTown, post them on Ed, etc. And other than that, let me stop sharing so I can see, go back to seeing my normal screen. So thank you, everyone. I'm really looking forward to this semester. I hope this has been a good start and it should be wonderful. There's a question, I noticed there's a question there on, did you make GatherTown yourself? Well, I didn't make GatherTown, but I did make that, those particular rooms and site. Actually, before you all leave, one other quick question is, if you find things in GatherTown or functionality you'd like me to add, if you want some more furniture in the room or other zones or whatever, feed that back to me and we'll, I can kind of continue to tweak those rooms and add more things in and as the semester goes on. Other than that, thank you, and I'm really looking forward to working with all of you through the rest of the semester. And I will see you in GatherTown shortly and then next week. So thank you very much, everyone, and I look forward to the rest of the semester.